Joseph had always considered himself a straightforward and direct man. From a young age, he prided himself on speaking his mind without filters or half measures. "I'm just being honest," he would often say after making some acidic or offensive remark. But the truth was that his supposed sincerity was just an excuse to be cruel and insensitive to others. At 29 years old, Joseph still lived in his parents' basement. He spent his days in pajamas, playing video games and eating the food his parents bought. He was constantly unemployed, always with an excuse ready to justify why he couldn't keep a job. "Bosses don't know how to deal with someone who speaks the truth," he would say, not realizing that his arrogant and lazy attitude was the real reason for his dismissals. His sister Adele was the opposite. Kind and hard-working, she had married young to Clayton, an equally kind man. They made a lovely couple, always willing to help others and with a smile on their faces. For years they had been trying to have a child, facing treatments and the pain of seeing their dreams postponed month after month. Joseph, of course, never missed the opportunity to joke about the couple's situation. At a family lunch, while everyone was chatting excitedly, he loudly said, "So, Clayton, still shooting blanks?" The awkward silence that followed didn't seem to bother him. "What? I'm just being honest," he said, shrugging. Adele and Clayton then decided to adopt a child. They announced the news at another family lunch, their eyes shining with happiness. Everyone celebrated, except Joseph. "Have you ever heard those stories about adopted kids who end up killing their parents?" he commented, making the smile disappear from his sister's face. "Joseph!" his mother scolded, shocked, but he continued, "What? I'm just warning you. Hey, Clayton, since you couldn't have a child, now you're going to have to raise someone else's child, huh?" Months went by until the whole adoption process finally reached a happy ending, and the day came when Adele and Clayton brought their adopted son to meet the family. He was a 5-year-old boy, with large, curious eyes, a shy smile on his face. The grandparents were delighted, celebrating the new family member. Joseph, who had come up from the basement attracted by the commotion, watched the scene with a displeased expression. "Wasn't there a prettier boy?" he said, breaking the joyful mood. "One that at least looked a bit like you? This boy is really ugly." The shock on everyone's face was evident. "Joseph, what a horrible thing to say about a child," exclaimed his mother, indignant. But Joseph just shrugged, as he always did when confronted. Years went by, and the boy, whose name was Leonard, grew up surrounded by love. Adele and Clayton were dedicated and caring parents, always present in their son's life. Joseph, on the other hand, kept his distance. When Adele invited him to Leonard's basketball games or school performances, he always declined. "No thanks, I prefer staying home playing video games," he said, not even trying to hide his disinterest. On the rare occasions he met with the family, Joseph never missed a chance to make unpleasant comments. "Did you see that report about adopted kids who rebel against their parents?" he would ask in the middle of dinner, ignoring disapproving looks. "I always said this adoption idea was dangerous." Leonard grew up hearing these comments, but the strength of his parents' and grandparents' love was greater than any spiteful word from his uncle. The boy became a confident and talented teenager, standing out especially in basketball. His skills on the court were impressive, catching the attention of coaches and scouts. Meanwhile, Joseph's life continued the same. He still lived in his parents' basement, still spent his days playing video games, still made offensive comments disguised as sincerity. His routine was only broken when he went out drinking with the few friends who still tolerated his presence. It was on one of those nights of drinking that fate decided to play a trick on Joseph. Sitting in a bar with 2 friends, he barely paid attention to the sports news playing on the bar's TV. But one news story caught his attention. A young basketball player from the city had been signed by a major professional team. Joseph almost choked on his beer when he saw the familiar face on the screen. It was Leonard, the adopted son of Adele and Clayton. The reporter spoke excitedly about the basketball prodigy, highlighting his exceptional skills and inspiring story of overcoming challenges. The next day, still processing the information, Joseph heard his sister's voice coming from upstairs. He ran up the stairs, eager to talk about the news he had seen. "Adele, I can't believe that weird kid you took in turned into a basketball player," he exclaimed, entering the kitchen where Adele was talking with their mother. "Now I'll be famous too. I'll be the uncle of a basketball player. I'll get tickets to games, see if he can get my name on the list for one of those parties and—" Joseph continued talking, excited about the possibilities opening up in his mind. But something in his voice made Adele stop. Years of offensive comments, of barely concealed disdain, of absence in important moments. All of this came to the surface at that moment. "Joseph," she interrupted, her voice trembling slightly, "do you really think there's a place in my son's life for you?" The smile on Joseph's face faltered. He wasn't used to being interrupted, much less questioned. "You've always used the excuse of being too honest to offend people," Adele continued, gaining strength in her voice. "I think it's time for you to hear some truths now." Joseph opened his mouth to protest, but Adele raised her hand, silencing him. "You are an inconvenient and unbearable person," she said, the words pouring out like a torrent after years held back. "You never wanted to be my son's uncle, and now is not the time for you to become one. You have always been quick to point out other people's supposed flaws, but never looked at yourself." Joseph took a step back, shocked by the intensity of his sister's words. He had never seen her like this, so firm and determined. An adult, without a job, without a family, still living in the parents' basement, Adele continued, her voice now softer, almost sad. "Do you really think you're in a position to talk about others? I hope you find your way, but for today our paths go in different directions." The silence that followed was deafening. Joseph stood there, mouth agape, speechless for the first time in his life. It was the first time someone had confronted him in that manner, exposing all his flaws and contradictions. Adele took a deep breath, feeling a huge weight lift off her shoulders. Out of respect for their parents, she had endured her brother's insults disguised as sincerity for a long time. But now, seeing the stunned expression on Joseph's face, she realized that maybe finally her words had hit the mark. Without saying anything else, Adele grabbed her bag and left the kitchen, leaving Joseph still paralyzed in the same spot. She knew that conversation had been necessary for a long time. For years she had tried to include her brother in her family's life, hoping he would change, that he would see the beauty and joy Leonard had brought into their lives. But now she understood that some people simply don't want to change. As she walked to her car, Adele felt a mix of emotions. There was sadness, yes, for having to confront her own brother in this way. But there was also relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. And surprisingly, there was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, her words had planted a seed of change in Joseph. Inside the house, Joseph was still standing in the kitchen, Adele's words echoing in his mind. For the first time in his life, he found himself forced to look at himself, at his attitudes, at the path his life had taken. It was an uncomfortable, almost painful vision. His mother, who had watched the entire scene in silence, approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son," she said softly, "maybe it's time to think a little about what your sister said." Joseph nodded slowly, still unable to form words. He went back downstairs to the basement, his refuge for so many years. But now the place felt suffocating. He sat on his bed, looking at the walls covered with posters of video games and movies, at the piles of dirty clothes on the floor, at the empty dishes scattered on the table. For the first time, he saw his space as others likely saw it, not as a refuge, but as a prison he had built himself. A prison made of laziness, of hurtful comments, of missed opportunities. Hours passed, and Joseph remained there, lost in thought. He mentally went over the past few years, remembering all the moments when he could have acted differently, the times when he could have been kind instead of cruel, the job opportunities he let slip away, the family moments he missed out of sheer stubbornness. When night fell, Joseph finally got up. He climbed the stairs slowly, as if each step represented a year of his life wasted. He found his parents in the living room, watching television in silence. "Mum, Dad," he said, his voice hoarse from so much time without use. I think I need help." They were the hardest words Joseph had ever spoken in his life, but they were also the most important. At that moment, something changed inside him. It wasn't a magical instant transformation. Those only exist in fairy tales. It was the start of a long and difficult process of self-discovery and change. In the following months, Joseph began therapy. Gradually, he learned to look within himself, to recognize his own fears and insecurities that he had projected onto others for so long. He started looking for jobs, first in temporary work, then in more stable positions. The path wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when the old, sharp tongue wanted to resurface. But every time that happened, Joseph remembered Adele's words, the look of disappointment in her eyes, and found the strength to keep trying. Adele, in turn, focused her energy on her family. She and Clayton continued to support Leonard in his basketball career, traveling to watch him play whenever possible. Leonard's success didn't change the family dynamic. They remained the same loving and close-knit family as always. It took a year before Joseph finally gathered the courage to seek out Adele. He found her after one of Leonard's games when the whole family was gathered to celebrate another victory. "Adele," he said, more nervous than he had ever been before. I wanted to apologize for everything." Adele looked at her brother, noticing the subtle changes in his posture, in the tone of his voice. She saw sincerity in his eyes, something she had never seen before. "Joseph," she replied after a moment, "thank you for saying that. It will take time, but maybe we can start over." It wasn't an immediate happy ending. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But it was a beginning of a new story, one in which Joseph learned that instead of pointing out others' flaws, he should recognize and work on his own. Joseph's story reminds us that it's never too late to change, to apologize, and to strive to be a better person. It also teaches us that the love of a family can be capable of healing deep wounds, but it is not always enough to transform someone who does not wish to change. Sometimes, despite all efforts, living together becomes unsustainable, and in those moments, distancing can be the best choice to preserve everyone's peace and well-being. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.